Hey, CBC. Thanks for posting the fake news last week about me getting the fine, trying to make everybody upset with our Toronto Police Service for doing it publicly. I just want everybody to know something. The moment I got here today, the very first thing that happened was the commander of the Toronto Police Service came up to me, and the first thing he did was promise me to ensure your safety, uphold your rights, and let you know that this is still our country.
I'm Chuck Black, and this is the Age of Ingenuity, our weekly chronicle of Canada's current innovation economy. And here's what's happening. Those of us who are firmly convinced that the Trudeau government is responding appropriately to the current pandemic by shoveling tons of cash down a bottomless money pit might want to note recent reports out of Ottawa on Canada's Supercluster initiative. In 2018, that initiative was billed as a generational opportunity to build Canada's innovation infrastructure by shoveling tons of cash into a different and slightly smaller money pit. But it's failing at both innovation and job creation. And we're going to take a look at that.
And I'm Alan Calder, and I'll be interviewing Chris Skye, the creator of Mothers Against Distancing and the organizer of private on-demand pod education. He's one of the organizers of a giant freedom rally planned for Dundas Square in Toronto on October the 17th. He also thinks the best way to create new jobs is to stop closing down small businesses, and he might be right.
But we're also going to remind everyone to like, to comment, to share, and subscribe to support this vidcast on Patreon and on PayPal. And with that said and done, here are the stories we are currently tracking. And our first story is indeed relating to the Supercluster Fund, which, depending on your state of mind, could mean something entirely different. But in this case, we are referencing the October 6, 2020 Beta Kit post, Supercluster funding, 74 million behind schedule. And the post notes that the federal government Innovation Superclusters initiative is far behind on its spending goals, at least according to a new report from the Parliamentary Budget Office. The new data is current only till March 6th of this year, but it does indicate that even before our current pandemic began, the federal government had doled out only about 30 million Canadian of the 130 million Canadian expected to be allocated for spending during that period. Even better, the majority of the 30 million spent went to operational and administrative costs for the various superclusters. I think that's bureaucraties for paperwork. We come from a time when the one thing you could count on was for the government to spend all its money. It wouldn't necessarily accomplish something, but at least it would spend all its money. And now we live in a universe where the federal government, one of the most incredible government spenders in history in Canada, can't even spend their allocated money for the Supercluster initiative. Al, what do you think about that?
Well, didn't it used to be for government initiatives, and if you don't spend your budget, you don't get it back next year, so you have to waste what you have left of it? Wasn't that how it used to run?
That might have been a long time ago. I remember that happening in the private sector. I remember I used to work in Austin, Texas at a subsidiary of IBM. Mm-hmm. And I remember I had a budget for entertaining and walk around cash. And I got pulled into my office by my boss one day, and he explained to me that I had to spend my allocated budget every month. And if I didn't, I would lose the money. But that's certainly not what's going to happen to the federal government this time.
Well, it's maybe not then, but still, they didn't tend to leave extra budget for emergencies though.
Absolutely. I would go so far as to say that it's not just the spending that's not on track. Mm-hmm. It's the estimated job creation, and it's the estimated increase to the Canadian gross domestic product over the next 10 years. According to the article, the PBO estimated that the Innovation Supercluster Initiative will only create 27,341 direct jobs over the 5-year period, compared to what they were hoping to create, which was 50,000 new jobs. That was projected by the federal government in 2018. I have no idea. You go.
So wasn't the problem also they had no way to actually measure if they were successful with what they were doing and spending the money on anyway, though?
Oh,
Wasn't that part of
absolutely.
the issue then?
But they've created these incredible metrics. I have no idea how the Supercluster Initiative is estimated to spend only enough money to create 27,000 and a bit direct jobs. It's such a detailed, specific number. I think they're blowing in the wind.
Stupid. They don't understand the reality of the world then.
Absolutely. The PBO also stated that it seems highly unlikely that the government will meet its objective of increasing the gross domestic product by $50 billion over 10 years. Based on their calculations, which the PBO called optimistic, the increase in GDP would be around 18 billion. I'm amused they didn't give an exact number for that.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, they stopped counting about money like years ago, I think.
Yeah. This is all guessing. This reminds me of the estimates for the people catching the COVID. Millions and billions of people are catching it every day. Bodies are piling up in the street, but if you go outside, none of us are dead yet.
No, the morbidity rate is down though overall.
I noticed that for the COVID as well. People aren't dying as fast as the government wants them to.
No,
they'll fix that, I'm sure.
Well, they will once we're allowed out though, back onto the street. Then people will start catching it for real. Then,
yeah,
like the immune systems. Then,
I tend to agree with this. I also note that this report has mostly been lost in the coverage of COVID and the coverage of Rob Ford. Maybe it's a little too detailed for the media in Canada. Maybe it just doesn't follow the proper narrative. I've only found a couple of articles on it. I found the October 6, 2020 Canadian Manufacturing Post under the title "Liberal Supercluster Program Falling Short of Promised Jobs and Economic Growth." And that article notes much the same. The parliamentary spending watchdog says a government program to fuse public and private money to promote innovation appears to be performing well shy of its promise. As we know from earlier coverage in 2018, the federal government promised just under $1 billion for the Supercluster Fund on condition that the partners in the Supercluster Fund, the private sector partners, contributed some money to it. It seems to be, I don't know, it seems to be an absolutely bad thing. That the money seems to be wasted. It's not going to small business. It's going to government paperwork, and it's wasting everybody's time.
Oh, no, well, the problem with this, Chuck, is that during this age of COVID, which the excuse that keeps on giving, why don't they just let us go back to our goddamn jobs and get our society back, and we'll pay them back in taxes then?
I think it's perfectly legitimate to note that our guest later on in this show, Chris Guy, is going to say the best way to give people jobs is to let them go back to work. But that's not what the federal government wants to do. The federal government wants to create giant edifices to their power and get everybody to work through there. I note that the October 6th, 2020, the Logic Post, Ottawa's superclusters unlikely to hit goals for job creation and GDP growth, according to a budget watchdog. They explained that in 2017, 2018, when the program was announced, the federal government felt that the program would help forge strong links between firms and research institutions, develop more skilled talent, able to share the risks involved in developing disruptive technologies. And the program, at least according to the Logic, bogged down due to protracted contract negotiations between Ottawa and the new organizations. At the time of the lockdown, we were like 1 year into the program, and we were like a year behind already.
Yeah, really. Sounds expensive.
Yeah, essentially everything got pushed back a year because of the paperwork. What a waste.
Yeah, well, at least the money's still going out, like it's going into style then.
Yeah, I see. I see a pattern emerging here. I mean, I see a government making grandiose promises, explaining that these are scientific estimates or scientific economics, medical expertise, and at the end of the time, we note that, hey, we're just guessing.
So we're talking with Chris Guy, who is the creator of Mothers Against Distancing and the organizer of Private On-Demand Education. He's one of the organizers of Giant Freedom Rally planned for Dundas Square in Toronto on October the 17th, and some great parties at Cherry Beach over the summer then. Now, the last time we spoke at Cherry Beach, me and Chris, I remember thanking him for being a guy who brings people together. Now, Chris, how important would you say face-to-face socializing is with respect, from your perspective then, with respect to getting together?
Well, it's the ideal thing, right? Because that's how you make a connection with the people, when you're actually there. When you're there and you're all at a protest or a gathering or festival or party, it's all because you're there for one united cause, a like-minded cause, a genuine cause, and that puts everybody on the same wavelength. So when you get that and you keep the message as positive as possible, it's just a great feeling. And that's how you touch people, and that's how you awaken the people. And once the people are awakened, they can start awakening other people. So it's really important, in my opinion, to get out there and be like really in the thick of it. Doing the lives and everything is very important too. You got to get yourself known. You got to get people aware. But actually getting out there is the most important. That's why I'm actually starting to go I was in Ireland a couple of weeks ago, but now I'm going to start going all across Canada, province to province to province, everywhere that's going to invite me, so we can really get our message across to everybody in Canada.
Yeah. I was going to ask you about that then. So you're mentioning that it is not as bad in the lockdown in some places that you have been. Now, do you think that the government is overreaching in Canada with a slow slide back into this lockdown mode here?
Of course they are, but this was the plan all along. If you watch any of my videos or talks, even as far back as March and April, before our lockdown was even ending, we were telling everybody this is all part of a plan. They want to keep you in a cyclical, perpetual lockdown scenario. So before summer ends, and they're not going to let you out of the lockdown fully, then we're going to start with the cold weather, and they're going to start a so-called second wave as an excuse to lock us back down. And they're going to do it as gradually as possible to minimize as much resistance as possible. When I went to Ireland, I went there specifically to warn everybody that they were supposed to open on the 20th of September. And I went there specifically to tell them that they're going to end up getting a plan that they're going to call a COVID preparedness plan, 5 stages. And every stage is a lockdown. Even level 1 is still lockdown. Level 5 is Australia style lockdown. And they were basically told they were at a level 2 and going to go up to a level 1 on September 20th, which would mean everything would be open. And I went there to speak to everybody to let them know that not only are you not going to be open on September 20th, they're going to push you back and lock you down into like a level 3. And sure enough, I stayed there till September 20th, and that's exactly what happened. They got pushed into a level 3 lockdown, and now today they're talking about putting them in a level 5 lockdown, where people won't even be allowed to go out of their homes.
Is that what they are in? I used to live in actually Melbourne, Australia. Then are they actually in a level 5 there at the moment?
In parts of Australia, they say they are. A lot of people are saying. A lot of people are saying the media stuff that we're seeing on Australia with the cops coming to the house, the cops bullying the protesters, is propaganda meant to scare people. Because I know people that live in Australia, and they don't live in the exact Melbourne location, but they know people that live there, and they say it's not as bad as it's showing on the internet. But I also know people in Ireland, and they're saying that the lockdown there is actually a lot worse than it was when I left. And we were in Netherlands as well. And Netherlands is a city or a country that's known for independence and known for not going with the herd, so to say. And they don't have masks anywhere. I've been to Netherlands 3 times this year. They did a pilot project in the middle of August for about 2 weeks where they started with masks only in Amsterdam and only in the red light district where they have the highest population density. The people put up with it for about 2 weeks, and then they said no, and they didn't renew it. So Netherlands has no mandatory masks, and they think the idea of masks on our kids, especially in school, is child abuse. And I have to agree with them.
I think most people really would, though. To be honest, most people.
Yeah, anybody that lives outside of Canada. Why do you think they haven't let anybody come to Canada since March? Nobody can come here. We can go to so many other countries, whether you have to take a COVID test at some of them or not. I've gone to places where you don't have to, just to make it easier on myself. But nobody can come here. And why? Because they don't want people coming here and saying, whoa, why is Canada so strict right now? Why is everyone wearing masks right now? We're not doing that in our country. Because Canadians only watch their TV and listen to their government. Most of them don't even leave the country, especially not during this lockdown period. They've all been scared to stay here. So they're getting their information from their TV, and they're not looking past Canadian borders. We are not the center of the universe. Our 35, 36 million people are not the be-all, end-all. All science and research does not end here. And people always tell you the propaganda they heard on TV, oh, you're irresponsible, you're anti-science, you're a grandma killer, etc., etc. Okay, give me one logical reason why there's plenty of other nations all around the world that have no mandatory masks and no problem, but we, over here in Canada, with the largest country and the lowest population density, need these masks more than anything. And anybody who disagrees is somehow a crazy person. Give me one logical reason. They can't.
Well, we all know what their logical reason is, then, but they can't admit it, right?
Yeah, they're scared.
Now, I have a question for you then. You had mentioned on Saturday that the churches were banding together to fight, remain open. Could you tell me a bit about those churches that you have been involved with and working with?
I'll tell you about that whole initiative. That was the first initiative I actually created, even before Mothers Against Distancing. Because right when the lockdown happened, I knew that the number one target of the lockdown was our small business sector, which, for everybody here, is the most important sector of our economy. 97% of all our businesses are small business. Small business represents 70% of all our jobs in Canada. It's the backbone of our economy, and it makes up the majority of the middle class. And sure enough, I knew they weren't going to be shut down for 2 weeks. No business is supposed to be shut down for 6 months and be able to survive. That's just not in anybody's business model. Granted, if you can't be shut down for 2 weeks and survive, you probably weren't going to survive anyway. But it was a lot longer than 2 weeks. And so we knew that was going to happen. So I created a nonprofit called Back to Work. And the idea was people weren't not going to work because they were scared of the virus. People weren't opening up their shops because they're scared of government fines, scared of the government telling them they're going to lose their business license, et cetera, et cetera. So we created a network that was completely anonymous and private, and the business owner would sign up, and I'd be the only one who knew their name, number, etc. And I would go to their business on site. We would go through their lease together. The first thing I would do is look for a special clause that's in a bunch of leases that says if you shut down for whatever reason, including government shutdown, you're not responsible for your rent. The landlord will not tell you. The landlord will take your money, and if you don't pay, the landlord will kick you out and find someone else who will pay, rather than give you that refund. So when I showed a lot of people that clause, it already saved their business. The other thing we would do is show them, based on their business style, business model, layout, everything, we would come up with an adaptive business model that would allow them to generate revenue without technically being open. That way, they can minimize their risk of a bylaw fine, and they can still generate the revenue they need to survive and keep their business afloat. The last thing...
Sorry. How did you learn so much about money handling then for these guys then?
It's not really money handling. It's just practical thinking and logic. You find the problem. The problem is, oh, I'm not going to be able to pay my rent. So how do we solve that? Look at the lease, see if there's anything that can come by. If there is, now they're in the driver's seat. They can either get a refund on their rent or they can renegotiate an entirely new lease with their landlord. The second thing was, how do we get them to make money without getting fined? And that's why I would go in there and I would come up with a very specific plan for each individual business. The third thing was, what do we do if a bylaw officer does show up? Well, we gave them an entire instruction manual of what to say, how to act, how to minimize their interaction with them in a way that's going to give them the best chance of not even getting a warning, let alone a fine. Finally, we gave them a legal team that's going to represent every one of the businesses in the network. And we got each business, as they sign up, to donate $100 to a legal fund, which has about around $8,000 in it right now, to pay legal fees for any business that does stick their neck out, does get a fine, and does have the government coming on them. But not only will we be there with our legal team and our legal funds, we will show up with other businesses. I'll show up with the media. I'll show up myself, and we'll show up with hundreds of people ready to back this business. So any business that gets bullied by the government, we're going to use what I call united non-compliance and bring all sectors of the country over to that business and stand up for them in one big voice. And that's what the churches started doing. That's what you mentioned. The churches came up with a declaration that states that they will not close even if there's a lockdown. And they're trying to get 2,000 churches across the country to sign this declaration. And if the churches sign that declaration, I want to mimic that declaration for businesses and get all the churches, all the institutions, and all the businesses under one roof of united non-compliance. It's very simple. Everybody together just comes together like in a protest situation and says, no, we will not close. We will not follow unethical orders. And just like a protest, if me and you try to have a protest, they'll come and they'll arrest us both. But if me, you, and 1,000 other people go to have a protest, guess what? Our protest is going to go on and we're going to be heard and we're going to get our way. And the same thing happens if we get 1,000 businesses and churches and everybody together and simply say, no, we will not close down. No, we are adults. Yes, we get to make our own decisions and freedom is essential, period. You don't get to decide who's essential and non-essential. As soon as you let the government decide who's essential and non-essential, we all lose. It's that simple. So that's what Back to Work was all about. That's what these churches are trying to do, and that's what I'm trying to do to help not just the churches, any institution or any business that's being forced to close by the government against their will.
Yeah, well, so what's the big push for the 17th then? Do you have any big plans then for the 17th?
There's two big things going on the 17th. So there's a big event at Queen's Park where we have speakers like David Icke and other people that are going to be joining us on a live screen because he can't even come to Canada and nobody else can, but he's specifically banned even without COVID. So he's definitely not coming here. But there's going to be an event there, and then there's going to be a separate event that's starting at Dundas Square. And the Dundas Square event is going to be a motorcade as well as a march. And they're going to bring everybody over towards the Queen's Park area and basically unite the two groups in the afternoon, pending the weather and everything else. But the main thing we're trying to push here is this lockdown was pre-planned long ago. Law enforcement was warned about this over a month ago. They knew that they were going to, the exact words I was told by high up law enforcement officials were they're going to go hard. And what that means is the lockdown is going to be more stressful and more stringent than last time. And they're going to have specialized enforcement teams to go around and try to issue as many fines as possible to try to scare people into compliance. That's their goal here. And if they get everybody to lock down, if people listen to Justin Trudeau and don't go spend time with their families on Thanksgiving just because they said so, and then they don't have fun on Christmas because Justin Trudeau said so, they're going to keep us locked down from now until basically June, July. And you can tell that because CERB was supposed to end September 27th. What did they do instead? They expanded it to 3 new programs: CRB, CRSB, and CRCB. What does that mean? Now more and more and more people are eligible to collect the so-called free money. Why? Because they know they're about to go through another round of forced business closures, and all the businesses that just are barely getting by are going to be forced shut down. We're going to see a business apocalypse. We lost 250,000 businesses in our first lockdown. We're going to see even more than that go, and that's going to bring such a high level of unemployment. We're going to have literally millions of people applying for these new programs. And guess what? They go all the way to July 2021. Why? Because they know we're going to be locked down, and from now until the weather starts getting nice again, and they'll slowly start opening us up like they did last time, but never let us fully open and then put us back on lockdown again. Why? Because they want people to get used to what they're calling their new normal. And they have these people convinced against their own better judgment that all they need to do to get rid of this so-called new normal is comply with the new normal. You cannot prevent the new normal by complying with the new normal. The more they comply with the new normal, the more that becomes their reality. And they're told, just wear the mask, and when the vaccine comes out, everything will be fine. In reality, if you wear the mask, next step is the contact tracing, then the vaccine comes out. Then even if they don't mandate it, they'll coerce people to get it. If you are on CERB, if you don't get your vaccine, they won't give you your CERB check. Sorry. Sorry about that. We got wolves over here. If you need to get your kids in school, they'll force you to take a CERB check. If you work in health, they'll force you to take a vaccine. If you work in healthcare, they'll force you to take a vaccine. If you're in the military, they'll force you to take a vaccine. And then they'll get as many of the normal people to take the vaccine as physically possible. And then guess what they're going to tell you? Sorry, everybody. It's not as effective as we thought. So now it's just another protective measure that we have to employ in our fight against COVID. So you still have to wear the mask, you still got to contact trace, you still got to social distance, we still need travel restrictions, and now you still need your vaccine. And guess what? That's your new normal. They're not, if you notice, they're extending mask mandates virtually all over Canada. They're not telling you you're going to take them off anytime soon. They're telling you get used to it because they're going to be here for years. This is their plan. If the people do not stand up, if the people do not say no, if the people do not keep their businesses open, the pattern is going to be all our small businesses are going to be closed. All the big businesses are going to consolidate all that wealth. We're going to give up all the rights and freedoms that millions and millions of people fought and died over for decades for us to enjoy. And then we're going to be in this perpetual state of servitude to the government who's supposed to serve us. It's very simple. If you're a business owner or you have a good job, you're an independent person. You're a part of that middle class. You can look after yourself. You can look after your family. You are responsible for employing other people. However, as soon as the government closes you down and forces you out of business, and now you're on some kind of CERB check and you depend on the government to survive, the government no longer serves you. The government rules you. And that's why they want to put as many people out of work as possible, as many people in this CERB as possible, because every person they take from that independent class and put into the dependent class is another person they have control over. And that's all this is about. People need to alter their perception. Right now, everybody's ruled by fear and ignorance. And you can't really blame them because they just get bombarded by lies and fear from their TV constantly, from government officials, from so-called health experts, and from our media. So when you're bombarded by that fear, you can't really blame the people for how they're acting. The only thing you can do is tell them the truth, dispel that fear. Once the fear is dispelled, you alter their perception. And when you alter their perception, they no longer become afraid. Now they'll probably become angry because they'll realize this isn't about a virus. This is about control. It's not about my safety or my health. Once again, it's about control. And when people realize that the government isn't their friend and this isn't all in their best interest, they will no longer be afraid. They will no longer be paralyzed against action, and they will no longer be confused. They will be angry. We want people to get mad. That's our slogan for MAD. Why do we want them to get mad? Because when you're mad, you cannot be controlled or manipulated. When you're mad, you are ready to act in your own best interest. And that's what we need everybody to do. United non-compliance means uniting every segment of society together. That means it doesn't matter what your age, what your ethnicity, your sexual orientation, your gender, whether you're government, law enforcement, civilian, even a criminal. We all have the same rights and freedoms, and those rights and freedoms are essential to a functioning and content society. So when our message is bring everyone together and preach a positive message of love, unity, truth, awakening, elevated consciousness, they cannot stop that. The more they try to suppress that, the more it just grows. And when people elevate their consciousness and change their perception and realize what this is all about, in one voice all around the world, we will simply say, no, we've had enough. I'm taking off this mask and I'm not putting it back on. And as soon as we can collectively get enough people in that mindset, this could be over before this interview is done. Because if everybody was like me, and everybody just decided right now that they've had enough of this and just took off their mask and turned off their TV, this whole thing would be over instantaneously.